You're not broken, but something is. Have you ever felt like there's something fundamentally wrong with you? Like everyone else got a manual for life that somehow missed your mailbox? Perhaps you've thought, if only I could fix this broken part of myself, everything would finally fall into place. We've all been there, questioning our worth, our capabilities, our very essence. In a world that constantly bombards us with messages about how we should improve, optimize, and fix ourselves, it's no wonder we often feel inadequate, flawed, or broken. But what if I told you that you're not broken at all? What if the real problem lies not within you, but in the systems, narratives, and structures that surround you? This is what we're exploring today. You're not broken, but something is. This insight isn't just comforting, it's revolutionary. It shifts our focus from endless self-criticism to a more expansive understanding of our struggles. It helps us see that many of our personal challenges are actually reflections of larger dysfunctions in our society, culture, and collective mindset. Subscribe for more content like this, and if you enjoyed the channel. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who began his life as a slave in Rome, understood something profound about human suffering. He wrote, "People are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them." This perspective invites us to consider how our interpretation of events shapes our experience far more than the events themselves. What Epictetus recognized, almost 2,000 years ago, is that our suffering often stems not from our inherent brokenness, but from how we've been taught to perceive ourselves in the world. The lens through which we view reality dramatically influences what we see. Consider how often we internalize external problems. When we struggle to keep up with an increasingly demanding work culture, we don't question the culture, we question our ability to perform. When we feel inadequate compared to carefully curated social media personas, we don't question the authenticity of these presentations, we question our own worthiness. When we find ourselves anxious in a chaotic world, we don't question the sources of chaos. We wonder why we can't just keep it together like everyone else seems to. The feminist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir articulated this dynamic perfectly when she wrote about how women often internalize the limitations imposed upon them by society. She observed that what appears to be personal inadequacy is frequently the result of systemic constraints. Her insight applies broadly. Many of our perceived personal failings are actually adaptive responses to problematic environments. Think about it this way. If you planted a sunflower in a dark closet and it failed to grow, would you blame the sunflower? Would you send it to sunflower therapy or give it books on how to bloom despite the darkness? Of course not. You would recognize that the environment, not the sunflower, is the problem. The sunflower is doing exactly what it's designed to do under the circumstances it finds itself in. Similarly, many of our struggles, our anxiety, our depression, our sense of inadequacy, our difficulty focusing, our burnout, are normal responses to abnormal conditions. They're not signs that we're broken. They're signs that something in our environment needs to change. The psychologist Abraham Maslow, known for his hierarchy of needs, understood this deeply. He suggested that before we can achieve self-actualization or reach our potential, we must first have our basic needs met: physiological safety, security, belonging, and esteem. When these foundational needs aren't satisfied, it's not a personal failing but a systemic one. Yet our culture persistently frames structural and systemic problems as individual shortcomings. Can't afford housing? You must not be working hard enough. Feeling burned out? You need better time management skills. Anxious about climate change? Try mindfulness. This individualization of collective problems serves a purpose. It keeps us focused on fixing ourselves rather than changing the systems that aren't working. It's much easier to sell self-help books than to restructure an economy that prioritizes profit over well-being. It's simpler to market anti-anxiety medications than to create communities that foster genuine connection and security. The philosopher Michel Foucault explored how power operates not just through overt force, but through subtle mechanisms that shape how we think about ourselves. He described how institutions and systems create norms against which we constantly measure ourselves. When we fall short of these often arbitrary standards, we internalize the failure as a personal deficiency rather than questioning the validity of the standards themselves. This brings us to a crucial insight. Self-doubt and self-criticism often serve systems that benefit from our insecurity. When we're busy questioning our worth, we have less energy to question the status quo. When we're focused on fixing ourselves, we're distracted from fixing the broken systems around us. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh offers a powerful counter-perspective. He teaches that our suffering doesn't exist in isolation. It's connected to the suffering of the world. Rather than seeing our pain as evidence of personal failure, we can recognize it as information about what needs healing in our broader environment. This shift from self-blame to compassionate awareness is transformative. Consider how this applies to specific challenges many of us face. If you struggle with work-life balance, it's not because you're disorganized or lazy. It's because we've created an economic system that demands increasingly more productivity, while providing less security. The 40-hour workweek was established when households typically had one breadwinner and one homemaker. Today, most households have all adults working full-time without the corresponding support structures for caregiving, rest, and community engagement. Your struggle isn't personal inadequacy. It's a rational response to impossible demands. If you feel anxious about the future, it's not because you lack resilience. It's because we're facing unprecedented global challenges, climate change, political instability, economic uncertainty, without adequate collective action to address them. Your anxiety isn't irrational. It's an appropriate response to very real threats. If you struggle with body image, it's not because you lack willpower or self-control. It's because we exist in a culture that profits from bodily dissatisfaction while promoting unrealistic and constantly changing beauty standards. Your insecurity isn't a personal weakness. It's the predictable outcome of constant exposure to manipulative messaging. If you find it hard to focus in an age of constant digital distraction, it's not because you have an attention deficit. It's because we've created technology designed specifically to capture and monetize human attention. Your scattered focus isn't a personal failing. It's exactly what these systems are engineered to produce. The political philosopher John Rawls proposed a thought experiment called the veil of ignorance to help us design more just societies. He suggested that we imagine creating social rules without knowing what position we would occupy in the resulting society. Through this lens, we would naturally create systems that work for everyone, not just the privileged few. Applying this framework to our current reality reveals how many of our systems are fundamentally unfair and dysfunctional. They work wonderfully for a small segment of the population, while placing impossible burdens on everyone else. If you're struggling within these systems, it's not because you're broken. It's because the systems weren't designed with your well-being in mind. This recognition doesn't mean we're powerless. Quite the opposite. By understanding that the problem lies not within us but in our environment, we can begin to direct our energy toward meaningful change rather than endless self-improvement projects that never quite fix what isn't actually broken. The existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre emphasized our fundamental freedom to create meaning and to choose how we respond to our circumstances. While we don't choose all the conditions of our lives, we do have agency in how we interpret and act within those conditions. This freedom becomes more accessible when we stop blaming ourselves for systemic failures. When we shift from "what's wrong with me" to "what's wrong with this situation," we move from shame to clarity, from self-blame to discernment. We become better able to identify what's within our power to change and what requires collective action. We can focus on creating environments that support human flourishing rather than forcing humans to adapt to toxic environments. The psychoanalyst Carl Jung introduced the concept of the collective unconscious, the idea that beneath our individual experiences lies a shared reservoir of human experience and understanding. Part of healing, according to Jung, involves recognizing how our personal struggles connect to larger patterns in our culture and history. This perspective invites us to see our challenges not as unique personal failings, but as expressions of collective wounds that need attention. For example, many of us struggle with what psychologists call imposter syndrome, the persistent feeling that we're frauds who will eventually be exposed. We tend to see this as a personal insecurity, but what if it's actually a rational response to systems that arbitrarily confer authority and success? What if imposter syndrome isn't the problem, but rather a symptom of hierarchies that lack genuine merit? Similarly, the epidemic of burnout in our society isn't a collection of individual time management failures. It's a systemic crisis resulting from work cultures that demand constant availability, economies that require multiple jobs to make ends meet, and the erosion of boundaries between work and personal life. Your exhaustion isn't a character flaw. It's a rational response to unsustainable expectations. The philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote extensively about how systemic evils can be normalized to the point where we stop questioning them. She observed how easily humans adapt to dysfunctional environments, often blaming themselves, rather than recognizing the abnormality of their circumstances. This normalization is particularly dangerous because it makes it difficult to envision alternatives. We've normalized working conditions that our grandparents would have found shocking. We've accepted levels of economic inequality that earlier generations would have revolted against. We've adapted to environmental degradation that would have horrified our ancestors. And when we struggle to thrive under these conditions, we're told the problem lies within us: our mindset, our habits, our failure to adapt. The philosopher and civil rights leader Grace Lee Boggs understood that transformative change requires both personal and systemic evolution. She wrote, "We cannot change the world without changing ourselves, and we cannot change ourselves without changing the world." This dialectical relationship between inner and outer change is crucial. While recognizing that systems are broken, we must also cultivate our capacity to envision and create alternatives. This brings us to a powerful question. If you're not broken, how might you direct the energy that previously went into fixing yourself? What becomes possible when you stop blaming yourself for problems that were never yours to solve alone? Perhaps you might find more compassion for yourself and others who struggle within dysfunctional systems. Perhaps you might connect with others to create islands of sanity and mutual support. Perhaps you might join movements working to create more just, sustainable, and humane alternatives to our current arrangements. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum has written extensively about the capabilities approach to human flourishing, the idea that societies should be evaluated based on whether they provide the conditions for all people to develop their unique capabilities and live dignified lives. From this perspective, many of our current systems fall woefully short. They systematically undermine the conditions necessary for widespread human flourishing while blaming individuals for failing to thrive. When we internalize this failure as personal inadequacy, we become complicit in our own oppression. We direct our rightful anger and frustration inward rather than toward the conditions that constrain us. We exhaust ourselves trying to adapt to the inadaptable rather than working to create environments more conducive to human well-being. The indigenous philosopher and activist Winona LaDuke offers a powerful counter-narrative. She speaks of Minobima Tisiwin, the good life, which involves living in harmony with nature and in balanced relationships with community. From this perspective, our current disconnection and dysfunction aren't inevitable. They're the result of specific cultural choices that can be unmade and remade. This wisdom echoes across many philosophical and spiritual traditions. The African concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are, recognizes the fundamental interconnectedness of human existence. The Taoist principle of Wu Wei, non-forced action, invites us to align with the natural flow rather than constantly struggling against it. The Greek concept of eudaimonia, flourishing, suggests that well-being comes not from conforming to external expectations, but from living in accordance with our deepest values and potential. These traditions offer alternatives to our culture's hyper-individualistic, productivity-obsessed, consumption-driven paradigm. They remind us that what we often interpret as personal brokenness may actually be the soul's appropriate rejection of values and systems that are themselves broken. The philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre has written about how we live in a time of moral fragmentation, where we use language and concepts from various ethical traditions without the coherent frameworks that originally gave them meaning. This fragmentation makes it difficult to articulate what's wrong with our current arrangements, because we lack shared understanding of what constitutes a good human life. In this moral vacuum, market values have filled the void. Success gets defined as productivity and consumption. Worth gets measured in economic terms. Meaning gets framed as individual achievement rather than contribution to community. And when we struggle to find fulfillment within this narrow conception of the good life, we're told the problem is our failure to adapt rather than the poverty of the vision itself. The theologian and civil rights leader Howard Thurman spoke of the need to seek what makes you come alive, suggesting that what the world needs is people who have come alive. This aliveness, this vitality and authenticity, is precisely what our broken systems often crush. They demand conformity, compliance, and constant performance at the expense of genuine human flourishing. Your discomfort with these demands isn't pathology, it's wisdom. Your struggle to fit into dehumanizing structures isn't weakness, it's integrity. Your refusal to accept the unacceptable isn't brokenness, it's courage. The philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti famously said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." This insight invites us to question our assumptions about who or what needs fixing. Perhaps your anxiety, depression, burnout, or sense of disconnection aren't signs of personal pathology, but appropriate responses to pathological conditions. This doesn't mean we're helpless victims of circumstance. The existentialist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir emphasized that while we don't choose all the conditions of our lives, we do choose how we respond to them. We have agency even within constraints. By recognizing that you're not broken, but something is, you reclaim the power to direct your energy toward what actually needs changing. This perspective shift has profound implications. Instead of endless self-improvement projects, you might focus on creating environments that support your well-being. Instead of blaming yourself for burnout, you might establish boundaries that protect your energy. Instead of internalizing economic insecurity as personal failure, you might connect with others to advocate for more just economic arrangements. Instead of seeing anxiety as a disorder, you might recognize it as valuable information about what feels threatening or unsafe. Instead of pathologizing your sensitivity, you might honor it as a capacity for depth and connection. The philosopher and psychologist William James suggested that our subjective experience, our consciousness, evolved because it serves a purpose. Our discomfort, our dissatisfaction, our sense that something isn't right, these aren't random malfunctions. They're valuable signals directing our attention to what needs addressing. When we frame these signals as personal brokenness, we miss their wisdom. We try to silence the messenger rather than hearing the message. We focus on managing symptoms rather than addressing root causes. The political theorist Audre Lorde captured this perfectly when she wrote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare in a system that depends on our self-doubt and exhaustion. Claiming your fundamental wholeness is indeed revolutionary." This doesn't mean denying real mental health challenges or the value of psychological support. Rather, it means contextualizing individual struggles within larger systems and recognizing how personal healing and systemic change are interconnected. The philosopher Ivan Illich critiqued how modern institutions often create the very problems they claim to solve. Medical systems can produce iatrogenic illness, health problems caused by medical intervention itself. Educational systems can undermine natural curiosity and love of learning. Economic systems can generate scarcity amidst abundance. Similarly, our culture's approach to well-being often creates new forms of suffering. The pressure to be happy becomes its own source of unhappiness. The pursuit of work-life balance becomes another task on an endless to-do list. The quest for self-improvement becomes evidence of our supposedly fundamental inadequacy. Breaking free from these loops requires recognizing that you were never broken to begin with. You are a human being, responding to your environment in understandable ways. Your struggles aren't character flaws. They're information about what isn't working in your life, in our systems, in our shared reality. The philosopher Georges Canguilhem challenged the very concept of normality, suggesting that what we consider normal is often simply what's been normalized rather than what's actually conducive to health. From this perspective, many of our current arrangements, from how we work to how we relate to our bodies to how we structure our communities, aren't normal at all. They're profoundly abnormal, and our discomfort with them is entirely appropriate. This recognition opens space for reimagining. If the problem isn't your failure to adapt, but rather systems that aren't designed for human flourishing, then the solution involves creating alternatives. This might happen on a personal scale, changing how you structure your days, what environments you choose to be in, who you spend time with. It might happen on a community scale, creating mutual aid, networks, co-housing arrangements, or local economies that prioritize well-being over profit. And it might happen on a societal scale, advocating for policies and structures that support human and ecological flourishing. The philosopher Charles Taylor has written about how we live in a secular age, characterized by what he calls the malaise of immanence, sense of flatness or meaninglessness that comes from losing connection to anything larger than individual experience. This malaise isn't a personal failing, it's a cultural condition resulting from specific historical developments. Similarly, the sociologist Emile Durkheim identified anomie, a state of normlessness or disconnection from social bonds, as a key source of suffering in modern societies. This anomie isn't an individual pathology, but a social condition resulting from rapid change and the erosion of shared meaning. Recognizing these broader contexts doesn't magically solve our challenges, but it does help us locate them accurately. When we stop blaming ourselves for conditions we didn't create, we can direct our energy more effectively toward what actually needs changing. This is the liberating truth. You're not broken, but something is. Your struggles aren't evidence of personal inadequacy. They're appropriate responses to dysfunctional systems. Your discomfort isn't pathology, it's wisdom. Your resistance isn't rebellion, it's sanity. From this recognition comes a profound shift. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you might ask, "What's happening here?" Instead of, "How do I fix myself?" you might ask, "What conditions would support genuine flourishing?" Instead of, "Why can't I adapt?" you might ask, "Should anyone have to adapt to this?" These questions open new possibilities. They free us from the exhausting cycle of self-blame and allow us to see more clearly where our energy might be most effectively directed. They help us distinguish between what we can change as individuals and what requires collective action. The philosopher Donna Haraway speaks of staying with the trouble, not rushing to easy solutions, but remaining present with the complexity of our challenges. This presence isn't passive, it's an active engagement that allows new possibilities to emerge. When we stop frantically trying to fix ourselves, we create space to perceive more clearly what actually needs our attention. This clarity doesn't mean the path forward is easy or straightforward. Systems don't change overnight, and creating alternatives requires sustained effort and collaboration. But directing our energy toward actual problems rather than perceived personal inadequacies makes that effort more effective and less exhausting. Remember, you were never the problem. You're a human being doing your best in systems that often make thriving difficult. Your worth isn't measured by your productivity, your appearance, your bank account, or your ability to conform to arbitrary standards. You're inherently valuable, inherently whole, inherently enough, exactly as you are. This doesn't mean you can't grow or change. It means that growth comes not from fixing fundamental brokenness, but from allowing your inherent wholeness to more fully express itself. It means that change can be motivated by love and possibility, rather than shame and inadequacy. The philosopher Martin Buber distinguished between I-it and I-thou relationships. In an I-it relationship, we treat ourselves or others as objects, to be used, manipulated, or fixed. In an I-thou relationship, we encounter the full humanity of ourselves and others with reverence and respect. Much of our culture encourages an I-it relationship with ourselves, treating our bodies as machines to be optimized, our minds as resources to be managed, our emotions as disruptions to be controlled. What might shift if we instead approached ourselves with the same reverence we would offer to something sacred? This reverence doesn't mean complacency or resignation to suffering. It means recognizing that our challenges often stem not from fundamental brokenness, but from disconnection, from ourselves, from others, from nature, from meaning. Healing involves restoration of these connections, not fixing some inherent defect. As you move forward from this understanding, carry this truth with you. You're not broken, but something is. Let this recognition guide how you interpret your struggles and where you direct your energy. Let it inform how you treat yourself and others navigating similar challenges. Let it shape what you choose to accept and what you decide to change. In a world that profits from your self-doubt, loving yourself becomes a revolutionary act. In systems designed for extraction rather than regeneration, prioritizing well-being becomes political resistance. In a culture that normalizes dysfunction, claiming your fundamental wholeness becomes a radical stance. You're not broken. You never were. What's broken are systems and narratives that led you to believe otherwise. In recognizing this truth lies the possibility of liberation, not just for yourself, but for all of us seeking to create a world more conducive to genuine human flourishing. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe. As we bring this exploration to a close, I invite you to consider what becomes possible when you stop trying to fix what was never broken. What energy might be liberated? What creativity might emerge? What connections might be strengthened? The journey from self-blame to systemic awareness isn't always easy, but it's profoundly liberating. And it begins with this simple, yet revolutionary recognition. You're not broken, but something is. But